Hello ladies, gentlemen, and persons in between. My name is Tim Snowborn, and today we're going to talk about the false equivalency of Nazis versus not Nazis on this episode of Serious Issues. So one thing I've actually tried not to do on this channel was to talk about current events. I didn't want to address current events because I feel like there's enough people out there doing that already, and I didn't want to be just another talking head on YouTube banging on about current events. I wanted to do something different. I wanted to approach things from a different angle. That's why I've tried to talk about this in kind of a philosophical, psychological, sociological, what I consider broader point of view. And I've tried to eschew the current events. But if you want your channel to grow, as I do, you gotta latch on to trending topics. So what I'm gonna try to do here is to connect trending topics with the more, again, philosophical, psychological, sociological, my approach that I've used so far. I'm gonna try to bring these things together so hopefully my videos will be more relevant. I mean, I think that the topics that I've talked about so far are more evergreen. I try to talk about things in broad enough terms to make them evergreen, but being broad enough to be evergreen doesn't help you trend or go viral. So I'm going to try to bring these two things together, so here goes. Ever since Charlottesville, there's been a lot of talk on the right about the violence from the left. There's been a lot of talk from Trump to Chris Cantwell trying to blame both sides, which is ridiculous. If you have Nazis and you have people who are against the Nazis, they're not the same thing. Those are called opposites. When one thing is directly opposed to another, they're called opposites, not equals. The Allied forces were not equal to the actual Nazis. The Jedi are not equal to the Sith. The Autobots are not equal to the Decepticons. Let's pretend for a moment that you're right and the left is just as violent. The Allied forces were just as violent as the Nazis. That doesn't make the Allied forces just as bad. There's the good guys and the bad guys. The Nazis, the human definition of evil, are clearly the bad guys. The people who are against the Nazis, the people who are against the human definition of evil, are clearly not the bad guys. The good guys are supposed to use violence against the bad guys, and no, I am not trying to justify left-wing violence. Yes, I know that there has been left-wing violence. I know about that baseball shooting, I know about the police who were shot, I know about the beatings that the left-wing protesters have given to right-wing protesters. I am not condoning any of that. And I'll wager most left-wing activists, flatly condemn left-wing violence. We do not want that. One of our inspirations, Dr. Martin Luther King, was a man of non-violence. We're supposed to take our cues from him. I'm not saying that I believe violence is never justified, but outside of an actual real war, yeah, I think we should condemn that. The left should condemn the left-wing violence, and I think most of us do. The way this is being framed on the right is that you have the alt-right innocently expressing a different point of view. That's all they're doing, right? It's basically being framed as the mean old liberals are picking on the poor innocent Nazis. Please. Look, if you want to have a calm, peaceful discussion about the issues, I am all for that. If you believe that we should slash taxes for the rich to stimulate the economy, let's talk about that. If you believe that we need less gun control, not more, great, let's talk about that. If you believe that life begins at conception, fine, let's talk about that. If you believe that government governs best which governs least, fine, let's talk about that. If you're out there with assault rifles and torches talking about how Jews and non-whites need to know their place, I am not inclined to hear you out and consider that maybe you have a valid way of looking at things. You don't. You are not innocently expressing an alternate point of view. The idea that any group of people are less than equal and should be treated as second-class citizens is off the table. We're done with that. We as a society have decided that other races are not subhuman. We have decided that LGBT are not deranged degenerates. You might disagree, but you're in the minority. Ironic, I know. The people who are inspired by this guy are not expressing an innocent alternate point of view. I agree that alternate points of view should not be shouted down and protested, but you have to draw the line somewhere. And I and my fellow liberals draw the line at the idea that any group of people should be treated as second-class citizens. We draw the line at the idea that people who aren't like us don't deserve fair treatment. That's all we're asking for, fairness. But what's really going on here is tribalism. It's like I said a few videos ago about in-group loyalty. Most conservatives are not Nazis or Klan members. Indeed, polls show that over 80% of Americans are against the Nazis and the Klan, including most Trump supporters. These guys are extremists. They do not represent the majority of the Republican base. They do not represent conservatives. Just because they are conservative doesn't mean they represent all conservatives. Of course not. The people who are out there arguing that left-wing activists are just as bad know that the Klan and the Nazis support the same president they do. The people doing the false equivalency routine don't like the idea that they're on the same team as the bad guys. They're defending the Nazis and the Klan because they're really defending themselves, because they don't want to believe that they're the bad guys. They don't want the guilt by association of being on the same team as the Klan and the Nazis. So they have to make it look like the liberals are just as bad. That's how they're able to ignore over 300 right-wing inspired attacks every year in the US and make a big deal when the left wing does it. That's how they're able to complain about the speck of pepper spray in the left's eye and ignore the assault rifle in their own. They don't want to believe that they're just as bad as the Nazis or the Klan, so they have to pretend that the left is just as bad. Only one side came to Charlottesville armed to the teeth. Only one side is considered a domestic terror threat by the FBI and the Department of Homeland Security. Only one side has threatened to go to war if their leader is deposed. Can anyone remember liberals threatening to go to war before Bill Clinton was impeached? Or before George W. Bush was elected? Law enforcement organizations across the country are not just as afraid of left-wing violence as they are of Islamic extremists. They're afraid of right-wing violence. They know that that's a real thing. Here's the thing, conservatives. You don't need to demonize the left in order to clear your own name. If you really want to clear your own name, you need to do more complaining about the Nazis than you do about the left. In all of these discussions I've heard and read about the supposed equivalence between right-wing and left-wing violence, the person who's trying to perpetuate this false equivalence always spends at least 95% of their time condemning the violence from the left, while barely condemning the violence from the right at all. Why aren't they complaining about the Nazis and the KKK? Why aren't they complaining about them? If you really believe that both sides are just as bad, why wouldn't you be complaining about the Nazis and the violence they've committed? That's what needs to happen. Both sides need to condemn any violence committed in their name. The left needs to condemn any violence committed by left-wing activists, and the right needs to condemn any violence by the right-wing activists. But I don't hear the right wing condemning the Nazis and the KKK. All they do is complain about the left and perpetuate the false equivalency line. If you guys on the right want to clear your name and not be associated with the extremists among you, you have to condemn the violence that they're committing, at least as much as you condemn the violence on the left. If all you do is condemn the violence on the left and hardly ever condemn the violence on the right, that doesn't make you look good. It makes you look like you are defending the Nazis and the KKK. If that's not your intention, you need to be clearer about that. You need to say, I absolutely condemn the violence committed by the Nazis and the KKK. I don't want to be associated with those people. They're not my crowd. And of course, the same thing goes for the left. We on the left need to loudly, wholeheartedly, and frequently condemn any violence committed by left-wing activists. We must not condone this. We must not tolerate it. That is not what Dr. King would want. Let's just all agree that ideological violence should be condemned regardless of which side does more of it. Conservatives, you are right to condemn left-wing violence. You are wrong to say that the left is just as violent. If you misdiagnose the problem, you won't be able to treat it effectively. I know you don't want to believe that you're the bad guys, and you're not. But if you can't own up to the violent extremists in your camp and kick them out instead of defending them, that's when you become the bad guys. If you're not a violent extremist or a hater, the right thing to do is to admit that you have a problem with violent extremists and haters and kick them out. I and many others on the left have admitted to and condemned the violence on our side. It would be nice to hear that from you for a change. We need to spend more time condemning the extremists on our side and less time condemning the extremists on the other side. So, tell me what you think, guys. Do you think the left-wing extremists are just as bad? Do you think the alt-right, the Nazis, and the KKK are just innocently expressing a different way of looking at things? Do you think I'm right that conservatives are only defending the Nazis and the KKK because they don't want to believe that they're the bad guys too? Thank you very much for joining me for this video. I hope you liked it. If you did, thank you in advance for subscribing, sharing, liking, and commenting below. See you next time, everyone. Smoke bomb!